What's up, everybody? Good afternoon. Good Thursday afternoon. Got a little bit of Seahawks stuff to talk about here, but first, before I get into any of that, we will be streaming at 7 o'clock on the Hawks Nest channel. So, in a few hours, me and him will be talking about all things Seahawks, including probably some of this as well, some of the news I'm about to talk about in this video. But set your timers, set your clock, set your alarm. 7 o'clock over on his channel this week. We're going to talk about some of the coaching hires and non-hires, as it were. We're going to talk a little bit about some trade candidates, which we've already spent a little bit of time talking about, but we're going to talk about some of the guys the Seahawks could maybe trade for. Going to talk about a few other things as well, but we should be able to fill at least an hour. Usually we go a little bit over, but yeah, show up to the stream over on his channel tonight. If you're not already subbed up to him, just search the Hawks Nest and he comes up. And sub, because his content is really good, and you should definitely follow what he has to say, along with following me, because we both put a lot of work into our channels, guys, so seriously. Okay, so now let's get to the Seahawks-related news here. We thought we had Ed Donatell, and then starting yesterday, it started to look like maybe we were going to lose Donatell, and now it has basically happened. The Vikings made it known that they were interested in Donatell as their defensive coordinator under Kevin O'Connell, and it looks like it's effectively done. I haven't heard the official word yet that, he has been hired, but he's going to be hired. So Donatell will not be a Seahawks senior defensive assistant in 2022. He will be the DC for the Vikings. And there are going to be mixed feelings on this one. I had a lot of people in my comments who didn't want Ed Donatell here solely because he was the defensive coordinator for the 0-12 Huskies team, which, I don't know. To me, that's a little weird. I don't know why people got so hung up on that. I certainly wasn't, but yeah, no Donatell in Seattle. And on top of this, to me, this is unfortunate. Some people may disagree, but to me, this is unfortunate. On top of this, we also have to deal with the potential second move that may be coming for the Vikings coaching staff. Corbin Smith tweets here, don't know if it happens, but Sean Desai could wind up staying in Minnesota on Donatell's staff potentially. And by staying in Minnesota, he means that he's obviously not with the Vikings as of right now. He wasn't with the Vikings last year. He's saying that he'll stay in Minnesota having interviewed for the DC job and not gotten it, but staying on in another capacity, if that makes sense. So the Vikings have poached Donatell from the Seahawks, and they could end up bringing in Desai as either a defensive back coach or a passing game coordinator under Donatell. So we'll see if this ends up happening. If we end up getting Desai, like I talked about yesterday, because it is still very possible that we end up getting Desai to be kind of co-DC with Clint Hurt. And if that happens, then I think a lot of Seahawks fans are going to be pretty happy about that, because Desai is younger, has more upside, has more potential, might even be a future head coach in this league, whereas you can't say that about Donatell. If that happens, I think a lot of people are going to feel like we came out with the better side of things here. But here's the thing. We don't know if co-DC is on the table for Desai, because presumably the DC position has been filled by Clint Hurt, and the passing game coordinator position has been filled by Carl Scott. So that may leave Sean Desai with a position like secondary coach or defensive back coach in Seattle, and he might prefer to take the passing game coordinator job in Minnesota under Donatell, who, by the way, Desai and Donatell have worked together previously. They spent a little bit of time together, so that's where the belief that Desai could end up working under Donatell comes from. So it is possible that after all this, the Seahawks get left out in the cold, where you don't get Donatell, you don't get Desai. I haven't heard too much about Joe Witt Jr. lately, but you don't get him. And you're just left with Clint Hurt and Carl Scott, who no disrespect to Carl Scott, but he was not on anybody's radar until the last couple days, to my knowledge. So, after a pretty exciting series of attempts to acquire appealing outside defensive minds, it is now very much on the table that we just end up with a guy who made most of his bones under Pete Carroll in the NFL, and a guy whose main claim to fame is that he was under Nick Saban at Alabama for 3 years and has one subpar season in the NFL so far. So that's where we stand right now. We're going to have to wait for the Desai domino to fall. But the thing is, we may not be able to wait for it to fall. So we may need to make our own luck here. And what I mean by that is, as far as I know, Clint Hurtt has not officially been named DC yet. It's just assumed that he will be. So if I'm right about that and you haven't named Clint Hurtt DC yet, you might need to pull it away from him and offer that to Desai to get him to come here over Minnesota. And obviously that would be a little bit dirty to him because he ended up not getting the Miami Hurricanes DC job because he was sticking it out here. But that's how this business goes sometimes. I mean, Donatel said he was going to come here, supposedly, and then he, a few days later, decided to head on out to somewhere else. And that's the way things go sometimes. So, look, I don't have anything negative to say about Clint Hurtt. I don't. I don't know very much about him, other than the fact that he's been our defensive line coach for a few years now, a few years in which we haven't really developed a whole lot of premier defensive line talent. Like, I guess, Jerron Reed, Darrell Taylor's kind of developed. I mean, these are second-round picks. It's not like some of these guys swung in out of nowhere here. Developed Poona Ford. That's pretty good. But didn't develop L.J. Collier. Didn't really develop Rasheem Green. I know the players like him. I know some people speak highly of him. But this is a guy who, if he was not getting a DC job in Seattle, or I guess the Miami Hurricanes, and that's a college job, probably wasn't going to get a DC job anywhere else. He was not considered one of the best young up-and-coming coaches in the NFL. Were it not for him getting brought on as a DC here, he probably would have just stuck it out as a defensive line coach for the time being. So if you kind of have to stab that guy in the back a little bit to make sure you get Sean Desai, then that seems to me the way that things have to go here. Because, again, as far as I know, Hurtt is not the official defensive coordinator. And unless you're willing to really swing for the fences here and go get somebody like a Vic Fangio, Desai's your last chance. Desai is pretty much it in terms of getting somebody from the outside, from that Vic Fangio tree that you seem to covet, unless you want to get Fangio himself. And I'm not saying the Clint Hurtt thing is bad. I'm not saying it can't work. But what I will say is that there will be no Kool-Aid drinking from me and most other Seahawks fans if he's the only guy we end up with. We will buy into it the moment that we see it working in the regular season during September and October and November, etc. If you bring in a guy like a Desai, who is considered to be one of the best young and upcoming defensive minds in the NFL, there's going to be Kool-Aid to be drunk on that. So if you want to get fans like me and many others genuinely excited about the potential of this defense, about the potential of you stepping back a little bit and allowing other people to control the defense more than you have before, Pete, then you got to make sure you wind up with at least one of these guys. And if you don't, then we're going to have questions. Specifically, I mean questions about whether or not good people want to come here right now. Last night I went over it. It seems like great players don't really want to come here. There was that, and I know Odell was not going to fix our season last year, guys, but Odell was giving an interview recently where he was talking about all the teams he was thinking about going to this when he was let go by the Browns, and he mentioned teams like the Saints. He mentioned teams like, I think, the Packers. Did not mention the Seahawks, even though supposedly the Seahawks made an offer that was bigger than what the Rams offered. And by itself, that wouldn't be a big deal, but it comes in tandem with all these other signs where it seems like great players don't want to come here. Now, if Sean Desai chooses to work on a defensive coaching staff under a rookie head coach for a team that was mediocre last year in Minnesota, overcoming here and being probably a roughly similar position, or, God forbid, turning down co-DC or full DC opportunities, then I don't know what to say at that point other than there is something that is keeping these people away. And I'll say it again, whatever it is, it's not worth keeping. I don't care if you think Pete Carroll's still a good coach. He's not worth it if he's going to scare off all these appealing prospects for players and coaches. But we're going to get more into that if this actually happens. If Desai chooses to go work in Minnesota instead of coming here, then there are going to be a couple things to talk about. One, this idea of appealing prospects don't want to come here because this, that, and the other thing. Or maybe we just weren't willing to give him enough power in the organization to appeal to him. He'd rather coach under a guy who he has some familiarity with in Donatell. So at that point, we're going to start wondering, like, why do you value Clint Hurtt so much? I know the players like him, but what has he done to make you think he's this amazing DC that you couldn't afford to lose? Like, you could have kept Clint Hurtt on as like a running game defensive coordinator and given the DC job to Donatell. I don't think he would have bolted to Minnesota if you gave him DC, but it seems like we played with fire and it burned us. That's what I'm getting at here. Seems like we played with fire. Don't play with fire with Desai. If you need to send Clint Hurtt packing to bring in Desai, I think you got to do it. Sometimes the NFL is a cruel business. Let me know what you guys think down below, though. I know this one's going to be kind of titchy. People are going to have different takes here. So see you guys later. Go Hawks. Stream on the Hawks Nest channel at 7 o'clock tonight.